What's up guys? It's been a little while since I made an Elder Scrolls video, but today I wanted to go over and give you guys some of my opinions, thoughts, and just general impressions of Skyrim VR for the PlayStation 4. And I'm sure some of you that really like Skyrim are probably somewhat curious about this particular version, and I figured I could give you guys my 2 cents on whether it's actually worth it or not. Now before we start, I should probably mention that I did not receive a review code for this title, and I actually ended up going out and buying it. So if you are looking for a more unbiased perspective, I think you'll be finding that in this video. And as always, these are just my impressions of what I've played so far, and right now I've got about 3 hours in Skyrim VR. However, I've played over 100 hours of both Skyrim Special Edition as well as the original version. But I guess without further ado, let's talk about some of the bad things about Skyrim VR first, before we talk about the plethora of really good things about Skyrim VR. First off, it's a really good thing that Bethesda decided to add support for the standard PS4 controller for Skyrim VR. And this is because the motion controller support is kind of awful, and in my personal opinion, it makes the game far more difficult to play than it otherwise should be. My first gripe with the motion controls is how most one- and two-handed swords, axes, and maces work. This is because it seems like if you simply move your hand, you can end up attacking when you didn't necessarily mean to attack. So you could simply point your sword in any direction, and the game could end up registering it as an attack when you had no intention of actually attacking. And as you can imagine, this can be a pain if you're sneaking, because your attacks could potentially cause an enemy to be alerted. I've also found that because of the way the motion controls were implemented, most weapon-related combat consists of simply waving your weapon over enemies until they die. Not only does this look incredibly goofy when you see it, but it also makes you feel like you're poking and prodding enemies with a stick instead of delivering clean slices with your sword or axe like you would think you would be able to. I also have to admit that I don't particularly like using a bow and arrow with the motion controls either. While it is really cool that you can physically draw arrows with the bow, I've found that it actually takes a lot more skill to pull off than it normally otherwise would. In the normal versions of Skyrim, you can aim using the reticle on your screen. However, with the motion controls, this reticle is removed, making aiming far more difficult than you would expect. Ultimately, using the bow with the move controllers can make things more difficult than they otherwise probably should be. But perhaps my biggest gripe with the motion controls, though, is that the movement via teleportation can potentially consume stamina. Now, while it's possible to teleport without consuming stamina, provided your teleport trajectory is a white beam instead of a green beam, it still sucks because there's a pretty good chance that you're going to want to do just one large teleport to cover a large distance rather than 3 or 4 small distance teleports to cover that exact same distance. Now, I'm not really sure why Bethesda chose to implement things this way. Maybe they wanted to prevent players from warping across the map in minutes, but it's still annoying to randomly have your teleport range reduced as a result of running out of stamina. It's also worth mentioning that some of the issues with Skyrim VR's motion controls also come down to hardware limitations. Unlike the Oculus Rift or the HTC Vive, which have multiple cameras to help track the player's movements, the PlayStation VR only has the lone PlayStation camera. And the reason this is an issue is because you'll find that enemies will occasionally walk behind you, and you'll want to physically turn around in order to fight them. However, if you do this, the tracking starts to poop out on you due to the fact that your body is physically blocking the camera that would be normally tracking your movements. To combat this, the developers at Bethesda implemented a solution we've seen in other games where you can press either the X or circle buttons on your PlayStation Move controller to physically turn that way. This way, you're always facing the PlayStation camera for the best tracking. And while this is fairly disorienting at first, if you're used to it in the other games, you may find that it's not so bad here. Still, I think if the PlayStation 4 had access to that additional camera, I think you'd ultimately find that Skyrim VR would be a much better experience, provided that you're using the motion controllers. Ultimately, what I will say is that you should avoid the motion controls, and while I think Bethesda did the best that they could with what was available, they also did make some weird design choices, such as how teleporting can consume stamina, and I also don't like the fact that the reticle is removed while you're using the bow. Though, I guess in their defense, those things could potentially be pretty easy to fix in a later patch. Other than my complaints surrounding the motion controls, I would say that the rest of my complaints for Skyrim VR are mostly bug related. For example, I found that one time I got on a horse and I tried to use a bow, and there was this bizarre visual glitch. However, it didn't necessarily affect the way the game played, it just looked weird. And I've also had some weird situations with the HUD. Occasionally I've talked to NPCs, and if I'm too close, I've actually had the NPC's face cover the HUD and the dialogue options that I'm trying to look at, and that can be kind of frustrating. However, as long as you back out of that dialogue screen, you can usually re-engage in conversation and things are all right and working properly after that. But I do just want to go ahead and reiterate that most of my issues with Skyrim VR are with the motion controls, because everything else I've tried, I've actually quite liked, and let's go ahead and we'll get into that. While this is probably fairly obvious if you've played a lot of VR games, one thing that's really cool about Skyrim VR is that it offers the player a sense of depth perception that you just don't get when you are looking at either a TV or a computer screen. And when you're inspecting items in inventory screens, it feels like you can physically reach out and touch those items. Or if you're approaching Skyrim's various cities and towns, you can get a really good sense of just how big and small they are. And the same thing goes with various creatures you may encounter. Dragons in particular look huge, as you will discover as you meet Alduin at the very beginning of the game. Now, with this said, while you won't be able to see the depth perception that I'm talking about in this particular video, what I can say is that if you get the opportunity to actually try Skyrim VR yourself, you will definitely notice it. As for something that you can definitely see in this video, unlike the other console versions of Skyrim, Skyrim VR runs at 60 FPS, and because of that, it provides all of the benefits of 60 FPS, such as reduced input lag, along with smoother overall motion. And in a certain sense, you're getting the advantages of the PC version of Skyrim on console. And yes, while you will need a VR headset, and there's also the fact that the image quality isn't as good as the PC version, in my mind, 60 FPS really enhances the experience and makes the game far more fun to play. And if you're curious, you can also do a lot of configuring to improve your gameplay experience. For example, if you're using a controller and you don't like the snappy movement, you can simply toggle it off in the options menu, sort of like I've done. Or if you don't like the fact that the game reduces your field of view when you move or jump, you can also toggle that off or reduce it as you see fit. I also really like the fact that the standard PS4 controller is supported for this particular release. While this may feel similar to Skyrim Special Edition, the advantage of this is that the vast majority of the controls on the standard PS4 version of Skyrim pretty much transfer over. So if you can play Skyrim Special Edition already, adjusting to the virtual reality version is much easier. However, the addition of adding the VR headset is that instead of controlling the aiming reticle with your right control stick like you normally would, you can simply move the reticle around by looking around with your head. And this makes aiming far easier, as you can simply move the crosshair over an enemy with your head and either shoot your bow or aim your spells that way. And while this can take some getting used to at first, this is definitely a superior way to aim projectiles at enemies. Now, of course, you're probably wondering, do I recommend Skyrim VR? Well, it sort of depends. If you were really looking forward to using the motion controls, I would recommend that you wait until Skyrim VR makes its way over to the PC. Not only will the motion controls be better on either the Oculus Rift or the HTC Vive, but you have the benefit of taking advantage of multiple cameras for much better tracking. And it's going to be nice to be able to look directly behind you and attack enemies that way, which is something you can't necessarily do in Skyrim VR for PlayStation 4. However, if you're a really big fan of Skyrim and or you already own or plan on owning a PlayStation VR headset, I think I can definitely recommend Skyrim VR. Skyrim is a pretty damn good game, and having a VR version of it is really cool. The enhanced depth perception really makes things far more immersive, and the ability to simply use a controller that you're already fairly comfortable with is really nice as well. Plus, the fact that you're getting 60 FPS and a lot of options to customize your experience is really nice as well. Now, with that said, whether I would recommend you go out and buy this day one, I'd really say that's up to you. If you're a big fan of Skyrim already, I don't think you'll regret going out and buying Skyrim VR on day one. But if you've already played Skyrim a bunch of times and you're looking to pick up other games this holiday, Skyrim VR could be something you might want to wait for a price drop on. But what I will say is that provided you're using a standard controller, this is an excellent version of the game. And if you don't plan on picking up this game on day one, I would definitely say you should pick it up later on, especially if you're a pretty big fan of PlayStation VR. But alright guys, I think that's going to pretty much wrap up this particular video. If you liked this video, feel free to leave a like. And by the way, leave a like on this video if you want to see more Skyrim VR content, as that will let me know that's what you guys want to see. Otherwise, like this video if you liked it, click the bell to join the notification squad, and as always, take care, and I'll see you all next time.